Hello everyone. Myself, Dr. Niharika Sapra, car volunteer, welcomes our respected speaker, chairman, and CEO, Dr. Kavita ma'am, car volunteers, and all the attendees to our car webinar. As our car chief administrator is not with us today, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce car homeopathic study group to all of you. Car Homeopathic Study Group Pro Bono was organized and founded by homeopath and humanitarian Kavita Kukunur, President and CEO of Kavita Holistic Approach Ka. This study group is intended to be an offering from Dr. Kavita to homeopaths around the globe, sharing goodwill and solid clinical work within the classical model are foundational principles for Ka. Ka's mission and vision are very unique to inspire young homeopaths, mentor, provide excellency for educational purposes using holistic approaches via webinars which are based on principles of classical homeopathy and provide professional continuing educational homeopathic credits for practitioners. We provide merit certificates for spreading the light of homeopathy around the globe. Dr. Kavita is member of Kelvin Friendly Foundation, a non-profit organization that helps serve poor people in greater needs in India. She is nationally board certified by Council for Homeopathic Certification CHC and ACHENA CPT provider and serves as the associate editor for the Homeopathic Heritage. She is the recipient of Martha Ownman Community Service Award by National Center for Homeopathy and Best Entrepreneur Award from Dr. N. Lingaraju, Principal of JSPS Homeopathic Medical College, Hyderabad, India. Tana Telugu Association of North America, a prestigious organization, honored and awarded her for selfless homeopathic and humanitarian services at Ladies' Night Out on October 2022, Michigan. Also, Dr. Kavita received the prestigious Legendary Homeopath Award with joint hands of Honorable Health Minister Dr. Dhan Singh Rawat, Senior MLA Mr. Harbhajan Singh Cheema, Ex-Director Homeopathy, Government of Uttarakhand and Chairman of HomeoCure and Research Institute during National Homeopathic Seminar Homeopathy, the Future of Medicine at Kashipur on 21st August 2022. Dr. Deepak Sharma, Ka Executive, Dr. Rajneesh Sharma, Ka Advisor, and Dr. Shweta Singh, Ka Chief Administrator, Ka team were also recognized and presented with Legendary Homeopath Award at the ceremony. We are proud to announce that Dr. Kavita was honored as the Woman of the Year 2023 from prestigious organization NATA, North American Telugu Association, USA. Dr. Kavita was also honored by renowned DTA executive community on Mother's Day at Michigan, USA with DTA Community Service Award 2023. We are extremely happy and proud that we celebrated 12 years of her book, Beyond the Limits, A Challenge to Prove Oneself. And her second book, A Dose of Spirituality with Kavita, has also completed 2 years. The ebook was launched last year in presence of Honorable Guest of Speakers, American Institute of Homeopathy, President Dr. Alex Baker, and Council for Homeopathy, CHC President Dr. Sheetal Tiwari at ACA webinar. At CA's second annual celebration, our Honorable Guest of Speaker, Dr. Jawahar Shah, Chairman of Enlightenment Education, launched its audio version and hard copy. We have donated over $1,500 to 10 to 15 charities, which we have also listed on the website. Dr. Kavita donated the proceedings of the books through Car Study Group platform to various charitable organizations and homeopathic associations. To name a few are Kelvin Friendly Foundation, CHC, DHMA, GSPS College, VT Seva, NCH, etc. Interested one can reach us for details at carstudygroup@gmail.com. As of now, we have nearly 450 recordings on professional webinars related to homeopathy, health related topics, and inspirational talks available on our channel, Kavatha Kokul. This webinar is moderated by Ka family, myself today. It is being recorded as we speak. We will take questions at the end of the webinar. We will post jot form in Zoom webinar chat at the end of the webinar. Please fill the form to receive your certificates. Kindly you mute yourselves and turn your videos off for better connections. Before we start today's session, I would like to cover the Code of Ethics and a disclaimer for Ka Study Group. Ka Ethics. To be a Ka speaker, one needs at least 1 2 months of active volunteering. Only Ka speakers' themes are promoted in newsletters and webinars. Ka promotes volunteering for 2 to 12 months, respect and inspires volunteers to grow. Active volunteers will be promoted through our website, social media, and added to WhatsApp group. Articles of volunteers will be posted on Ka website and newsletter and will be sent for publication at other journals too. Volunteers and speakers are eligible for prestigious Ka annual awards. Volunteers are eligible for Ka inspirational talks. Volunteers are eligible for case discussions. Ka promotes homeopathic organizations as well as their mega events. Ka promotes great work of speakers through their book reviews. Honorable guests may propose their future or after the webinar. Ka maintains a healthy and happy environment, so keeps only like-minded folks. Please mute yourself so that there is no interruption in between. I hope the screen that was shared is being visible. Disclaimer. All the Ka Homeopathic Study Group webinars are for educational purposes only and not intended to diagnose or treat a disease. Listeners can benefit with the information shared at the webinars. The opinions expressed by speakers, moderators, and attendees are part of educational experience and do not necessarily represent the position of Kavita Holistic Approach, Ka, or Ka Homeopathic Study Group, Proban. Let me introduce our honorable speaker to you all. We have with us today Dr. Deepika Balani. Ma'am's topic for today is what patients don't tell you, but you must know. Welcome, ma'am. Ma'am is homeopathic physician, faculty, national and international speaker, researcher, recipient of various national level awards as well as triple fellowship in Tokyo in 2025 for research, health outreach, health services, clinical work, and charitable services. Ma'am is active volunteer of Ka Study Group Pro Bono, USA, executive member, organizing secretary 2026, student coordinator and joint secretary 2025, Delhi Homeopathic Medical Association, etc. Ma'am, we would love to learn from you today. Over to you.
Thank you, Niharika, for such a wonderful introduction. I hope I'm clearly visible and audible as well.
Yes, ma'am, you're audible, but I can't see you.
Okay, I'll start sharing my screen also. Just let me know if it's visible.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So before I start, I am grateful for Kavita ma'am to share this message with us today. So I'll play the message first. Is the audio there? From the
Ma'am, it's there but
Video?
not clearly audible. Would you
Okay.
like me to share it?
Yeah, sure.
Give me a minute.
There's no audio, Niharika.
Congratulations and best wishes on the occasion of World Homeopathy
Yeah, it was there now.
Day, doctors, friends, and participants. Warm greetings to you all. Heartfelt congratulations and best wishes on the occasion of World Homeopathy Day, as we also celebrate the 271st birth anniversary of Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. With deep gratitude, we pay tribute to our founder of homeopathy, whose vision and dedication to natural healing continue to inspire generations and touch countless lives. We also extend our best wishes to our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Deepika Balani, MD Homeopathy, for today's webinar on topic What Patients Do Not Tell You, But You Must Know. Please stay tuned for updates of our study group team is doing on behalf of World Homeopathy Awareness Week and also activities of Ka Miraculous Minds group meditation and upcoming Ka 6th annual celebration event which is on May 9th. Those details will be shared via website, newsletter and social media channels. Sincerely thank all our Ka volunteers for their continuous dedication and selfless support. Long live homeopathy with appreciation and gratitude, sending light and love to you all. This is Dr. Kavita Kokunur, President and CEO of Ka, sending greetings from Michigan and USA.
Is the screen visible properly?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay, so thank you, Niharika. So with the blessings of Dr. Hahnemann on his birthday and blessings of Kavita ma'am and the Ka study group support, we'll begin today's webinar. The topic for the day would be what your patients are not telling you, and we are going to be discussing hidden clues in homeopathic case taking. I feel that this topic is extremely practical and transformative for our practice. And it's not about those new remedies or the novel theories that are there, but I wanted to talk about something that's completely immediately actionable. What the patients are not telling you or what they are uncomfortable in telling you. So, what happens is that in many cases, why prescription fails is because it isn't because of the wrong remedy, but is because of the information that was left out either by accident or by omission from our part, from patient's part. It can be anywhere. So I intended to dig a little deep and discover and find those physical, emotional, and behavioral cues that the patient either overlook or they consciously, unconsciously hide it. and how to unveil them during the case taking. And in this session, I would also like to discuss some advanced strategies, which is backed by strong evidence from the classical homeopathic books, as well as what modern researchers have come up with to achieve consistent results. The relevance behind the topic would be to see how Hahnemann's principle, that was to remove all that does not belong to disease, can be achieved by implying careful observation that is there beyond the words. So let's start with a reality check. Patients usually do not tell us everything. Instead, they only report whatever they feel that is important, or what they remember, or what is something socially acceptable, or what they are currently feeling the most at the moment. So any researcher, any doctor, any dialogue with the patient, can confirm those immediate surface level symptoms. For example, if in primary care settings, there was this one research paper by Paskins et al., which found that 27% of the symptoms patients discuss were never actually mentioned in the consultation. There's a similar study in New Zealand which shows that nearly 30% of the patients, they withhold their psychological problems from their practitioner. In other words, I wanted to focus on the significant clues about a person's suffering, which often remain hidden. So what happens here is that one reason might be because that the patient is adapted to their symptoms or their discomfort over time. It is something very chronic they are facing, or it becomes their new normal. Things like long-term patients having heartburn or minor joint pain, they eventually think that it's a part of their routine. So what patient assumes, that doctor must be knowing all these things, or they might also think that it is not that important to be taken care of right now. Another reason is that patient might feel embarrassed, or there are certain aspects of health that they feel as if they are a taboo. So there were multiple surveys conducted which reveal that many patients do not share their symptoms like anxiety, grief, depression, or complaints of their reproductive health. They are really not comfortable sharing those symptoms. And also they feel that these matters do not need that discussion. So patients, what they do is that they self-edit the symptoms, and that creates a clinical blind spot. Our job as a physician is to close that gap or minimize the gap as much as possible, so that there is a systematic protocol in the way we can inquire from the patient about what that patient has not communicated. And only by acknowledging them, giving them that time, and chiseling our interview technique will help us achieve this aim accordingly. So in totality, I'll just summarize the key idea. Key idea is the normalization of symptoms. Say, for example, there is a chronic cough that patient says it's a habit. Huh? There is some minor cough that's always running. So one question we can ask them is that what else that is bothering them, what they feel is normal. This is one way of asking that. Or if we dig deeper into our literature, we can also find a few symptoms. Say, for example, there are mentions in phosphorus or sulfur literatures where patient often says that it's just normal for me. Or if we go into repertory and we search the repertory, there are also undiscussed chronic issues. For example, there's a rubric by generals activity aggravated, lying down or off bed, etc., if the patient moves. So why this is happening? This happens because patient is filtering out details. So the first reason is that they get adapted. So there is a term in physiology which goes by the name allostatic load, which means that the body is adjusting to the persistent stress that is coming on the body. So what was once painful for the patient now becomes just like a background noise which patient ignores. Thus, the patient is used to those burning sensations, chronic constipation, or that anxiety. So I'll share a clinical symptom that comes to me almost daily whenever I'm inquiring the mental sphere. Patient always says that this stress is always there in everyone's life. There is nothing I have to share with you. There is nothing as important that I can share with you. So these are the common sentences that we hear from the patient. So as I was saying, the patients usually get used to it, or they don't feel that the symptom is worth mentioning. It is not a part of their identity. It is not a complaint for them anymore. So we can say that, like how one stress threshold rises over time, similarly, the tolerance for that symptom rises over time. Secondly, we can say that there is an awareness gap. Patients often do not recognize the significance of certain symptoms. For example, say dreams, sweat patterns, they become very irrelevant for them. Homeopathic literature emphasizes on such simple symptoms, and these are key details for curing the patient. There's another research paper by Yadav where he observes that the patient hides or forgets their important symptoms. For example, their dreams, cravings, sweat patterns, etc. Now, our third point, emotional inhibition. It also plays a very important role. Here's when I was going through some studies, they showed that how people hide their personal struggles either due to shame or stigma. So many believe that a doctor is not a right person to talk about such psychological issues. There was another survey which particularly mentioned that nearly 1/3 of the patients don't disclose their anxiety to their physicians just because it's not worth discussing. As a homeopath, we have an advantage. We have to break this barrier, and we should always remember that the patient's story that is visible to us is just the surface. Underneath that surface, there are hidden stresses. For example, anger, grief, fear. These are the kind of symptoms that may be driving the main symptoms that we see on the surface. When we go through materia and repertory, we find specific remedies. Say, for example, suppressed anger is mentioned in Staphysageria, Natramur, Chamomilla. Grief unexpressed, it's mentioned in Ignitia. And one rubric also I can share with you, that delusion, he is persecuted, etc. So I have tried to summarize everything in a flowchart so that it's easier to understand. This will depict the process that I am trying to describe here. When a patient has this new symptom, which is an experience that he's having, but over time the body will adapt and normalize it. Eventually, what will happen is that these usual symptoms patient will not report to us. Then there is an incomplete case taking, and the prescription is based on the incomplete data. Say, for example, I'll name a disease and we'll work this flowchart through it. Say, for example, there's a back pain, which turns out to be chronic. Some years after it becomes normal for the patient, then the patient will not mention that symptom. And our goal is to stop this flowchart, stop this chain, and interfere before that normalization happens by interpreting those symptoms like those non-reported symptoms as a clue for ourselves. I will emphasize once again that normalization is not normal clinically. It signals chronic pathology. I will repeat, normalization is not normal clinically. It signals chronic pathology. Okay, so these also depict those chronic miasmatic patterns that run in the case. Also, patient doesn't report things like times of the day when the symptom is worse, or any particular place, any particular condition that might have caused this unlabeled symptom. So now we'll go one by one how these hidden clues can be deciphered so that we have a structure and we do not miss even a single aspect of the case. This will organize our thinking a bit. The hidden clues can be either physical, emotional, or behavioral. Physical clues are those bodily complaints that the patient thinks are of his routine, and emotional complaints are those feelings that the patient finds irrelevant or they are hard to articulate. Behavioral clues are those clues where the patient shows it through his body language or through tone and the mannerisms, tone of the voice maybe, or mannerisms in general. We will explore each section in detail, no worries. And I would also want to emphasize here that the interconnections between all these three domains is very important. Because, say, for example, if the person is having some kind of an emotional stress, it might directly affect his sleep or her appetite. Now, our first domain, physical clues. Physical clues, they are often those long-standing symptoms, neglected symptoms, and the patient describes those symptoms like, this is just how I am, or this has forever been normal for me. So what these indicate is that the patient is living with a chronic symptom, and in homeopathy, such hidden chronic symptoms are the keynotes for us, which provide us highly individualized cues. Say, for example, maybe a patient may think burning souls at night is a normal phenomenon, even if the patient is ignoring them for years. But this might be a keynote for us and point us to certain remedies like arsenic or sulfur. These are just, I'm giving examples. I'm not generalizing these things. It's just to make it easier to understand. Also, we can also specifically inquire about each organ system and not just their chief complaints they come with. Say, for example, you can ask them, what do you live with day after day? Or you can check their systems by asking about their constipation, their menstrual irregularities, any cravings that they are having, aversion, sleep pattern, the usual questions that we keep asking in the detail case taking. And we have to give particular attention if the answer of the patient is not as clear or is just a generalized response. Also, a patient might say, for example, that he is craving ice cream, but I am feeling that it's weird. These are actual examples now I'm sharing. One patient came with me and said, I like ice creams, but I'm feeling it's a little too much that I like, but this is how I am. So this clue gave me a valuable lead in that in that case. Also, there are a few researches which confirm that patient overlooking their symptoms in their routine. I'll quote the same paper again by Yadav, which says that the patient might not consider their dreams, their sweat patterns, their cravings as important. They shrug it off. Okay. Another example I'll give you, say, for example, a case came to me where he was saying that I just keep having headache. And then after inquiring so much, the neglected symptom in his case was his just heartburn, which is just normal. He just has acidity here and there. So if we did not have this clue, we might have prescribed a remedy such as belladonna, maybe on the symptom characteristic. But here we switched to natrum mur when the gastric signs came up. Obviously, I'm not sharing the detailed case here. It's just how I'm connecting the dots. I want you to understand. Another example we can take, say, for example, we can focus on other physical cues. Say, for example, there is this one rubric in the repertory where the patient is saying that my pain is there on the back of the scapula or associated with belching. So this is how we can pick up those hidden clues. This is a general remedy comparison table to help you understand how symptoms can be there as cues, what rubrics they can present with, so that I'm just taking a few common remedies so that it's easier to grasp on this concept. So each remedy, if you can see in the picture, is chosen by combining the hidden burning mortality with the constitutional sign that they might present with. So if you see this one reference I'm sharing, burning feet soles burning worse at night. Another is anxiety health. So what we do here is we monitor the response timeline and we see that the physical symptoms often need those few weeks to subside into chronic cases. The most popular example you can read here is sulfur. So I'm sharing one case here where the physical clue was the most important clue for the case. There was this 45-year-old woman who came with IBS problem. Her main symptoms were gas and constipation. So initially I was focusing on the diet and stress, but after a few minutes down in the case taking, she casually mentioned that her feet always burnt at night. So she used to remove her socks or kick off her covers. Then she said it was just unrelated. On probing more, we found that this turned out to be a keynote in her case. Constitutionally, when we tried to inquire her more, she had anxiety, aversion to heat, and these rubrics led us to sulfur. We had prescribed her sulfur. There was another remedy, lycopodium, in the background, but her main prescription was sulfur. Within 2 weeks, her burning feet had reduced significantly. Similarly, we saw the improvement in her IBS. And as soon as her digestive systems improved, even her burning also improved simultaneously. So another concept here I want to show that the remedy escalation, which was done here in this case, first we gave her 30, then we gave her 200. It's a common strategy for chronic cases, which is done after an initial response. And this helps us solve the chronic case. Next, we are going to focus on emotional clues. These are the heart of the case, best explained by Kent. So patients rarely tell us their inner feelings unless they are either safe with us or they assume that the doctor only cares about their physical symptom. But this is a key for cure in our system of medicine. There's a very senior homeopath, Dr. Anita Salokhe, who also advised focusing on the basic feeling, emotions, and thought processes underlying the symptoms. So what happens is that the patient might say their headache is from stress, but they do not elaborate much in detail. So if you try to ask them with questions such as how did that situation make you feel, or what worries the most about your illness. So there was this one case that came to us which said that she was suffering from chronic migraine. After probing, we got to know that she has had some marital stress, long held anger towards her family members and husband. So here also our remedy changed from something catering to simple migraine to a deeper emotional remedy such as Datramuse, Staphysaga and Ignitia. Clinically, one more important thing that we should watch for incongruences. Say, for example, a patient says that I am never angry, but then if you touch a particular part of their case, so they will suddenly start clenching their fists or wringing their hands like this. So in such cases, one has to validate that one just validate their emotions and say that I understand how hard it is for you to talk about, and I notice that you are tensing up a bit. There is something unspoken. If you are getting bothered by it, please feel free and comfortable to share. So often what happens is patient will open up and realize that they are welcome and safe in sharing their symptoms. So the key point here remains, most patients hide emotions not to deceive us, mostly, but because of a stigma in their head, or they have in their society, or because just out of simple habit. Another research states that 25 to 50% of people, they withhold their sensitive information such as depression or abuse, etc., from their treating physician. Reasons: embarrassment, fear of judgment, and not wanting any difficulty in following up because the emotions are difficult for them to process. As homeopaths, we must create an environment which helps the patient overcome those barriers. One rubric I can share, which was important in one of the cases, was mind desire to be alone. Most common remedy, Natramur. Mind aversion to consolation, say Ignitia. So what happens is that these emotional clues, they directly lead us to a remedy. Another remedy I can give you an example of, Baraita Carb, which has grief from humiliation, aversion to consolation. Ignitia also gives us a symptom of grief plus a lump in the throat, the globus hystericus symptom that Ignitia has, etc. You can explicitly ask your patients that what upsets you most about a current problem, and they will lead you to the important clues in the case. So the symptoms that I was discussing, I have summarized those 4 remedies in this table, and I want you to understand that just follow what patient is leading you to. If they mention a feeling, whether it's briskly, so just pause your case taking there, gently probe them, and you will often be surprised that you are being landed on a remedy chosen predominantly on the base of that emotional clue that they gave you, supported by the physical complaint, obviously, but that leads to an important clue. Another case I'd like to share with you, where the emotional part was important for me. This was a 35-year-old woman with a 10-year-old migraine history. And initially, in the earlier days of my practice, when I was still very naive and young, so we were prescribing based on her headache symptoms. But then suddenly one day she said that she's stressed, I guess. Like, she was very casual about the expression of that thing. And when we started to ask her in a bit more detail in that interview, she was avoiding the eye contact with us. Then we were taking names of a few family members. Then the moment we landed on a question pertaining to her husband, she started to tremble. Then we asked her, what tensions are you facing at home? And the moment we asked this question, she began to cry. Then she revealed her deep, deep resentment that she had because her husband was neglecting her. And she thought that these feelings were not as important to, discuss with someone, especially a doctor. So in that case, we gave her Natramur, and earlier we gave her in 200. We focused on her emotional state. 2 weeks later, she reported that she had a dramatic improvement in her substantial improvement in her headaches. They were far, far less intense, and she expressed her relief very clearly. And even she clearly shared her feelings that now she had. The moment we touched her unspoken emotional layer, the case started to solve for us. Here, the main rubric for me was mind, grief, and disappointments, which combined with her physical migraine symptom helped us discover the hidden anger, which changed the course of this treatment. A few more examples while we are discussing this case. Another important rubric can be mind desires to be alone. Desires no consolation. Again, we come back to Natriumur in such cases. So our aim should be to remove the preemptive cognitive bias that we have. We do not fall into categories where we are just particularly focused on the superficial layer of the case, and which can help us solve the cases. The third important leg of the stool is behavioral cues. Behavioral cues are those silent languages in which patient communicates. And I'd like to emphasize here that whenever we are communicating, the 80 to 90% of communication when a human is communicating to another human is mainly non-verbal communication. So, for example, a patient might pretend or show that they are calm, but one moment you notice that they're continuously tapping their feet on the floor, or maybe they are cracking their knuckles. So, what we can understand here is that these cues, they often reveal the hidden anxiety, restlessness, or suppression of emotions that you can inquire and get that information. And as a practitioner, you should always note to watch the person as a whole. Say, for example, if you see a person is, just crossing their hands, maybe they are defensive about something, or they're avoiding eye contact because maybe they are shameful or embarrassed or shy because of something, or maybe they're smiling at something they shouldn't be smiling at, which in psychiatry terms is called incongruent affect. So what these signals do, that they are more truthful than what patient is uttering through words by their mouth. There was this one study I came across which told me that patients may say that they have no anxiety, but they are fidgeting while talking to the doctor, which is an immediate red flag. So use your observation skills systematically. And even in Organon, it's mentioned that a homeopath should be an unprejudiced observer of body and mind, both. So scan for such symptoms that we are discussing, maybe sweaty palms or restless legs, changes in the voice while they are talking, or when you try to inquire a particular issue of their life. For example, a patient might glare also at you when you're asking a question. So when you find those things, just gently probe and they will talk to you. And believe me, these non-verbal patterns, they will directly land you to a remedy in most cases, because they are individual to the person you are taking the case of. For example, there was this one case that came to us where a person was continuously clearing his throat. So in that case, upon detailed case taking, lachesis was prescribed just because of that throat sensitivity, which was the most important factor, most unusual, peculiar symptom in that case. We are comparing again a few remedies here for understanding. This table will help you guide in asking those questions. Say, for example, we assume that a case is lycopodium. So their hallmark would be restlessness with fear, or these kind of behaviors where which fits with the common anxious behaviors might lead you to lycopodium here. I have also tried to mention the rubrics of these common remedies. Now we come to an important segment of this topic. Here I have tried to visualize the case taking in an observation model, where in step 1 you will notice the behavior of the patient. Say for example, patient is continuously yawning, or then you will come to step 2 where you identify the patterns. I'm continuing that yawning example in every step. So now you, in the behavior, you saw the person was continuously yawning, and then when you recognize this pattern, that patient was maybe yawning because when you were discussing about his family, then now we come to step 3 where you try to interpret it. That is that yawning because of boredom, or is it because of some fear, or he's trying to suppress the sighing that is there. Now we derive the remedy inside, where maybe there is a secret sadness or exhaustion which might point us to remedies like ignitia. Or if there is more of a physical fatigue, then it might point us to arsenic. So observation and reflection, they work together. Another example I would like to share, wherein a patient was continuously touching the throat, which was fitting for the sensation of lump that the patient was having in their throat. Again, I'm giving you an example of ignitia. It is also a very well-known rubric for it. So when you systematically use this model, we turn a fleeting behavior into a classic clue for individualization of that case. So while I am practicing clinically, I reinforce those observations from the very first second the patient enters into the chamber. Say, for example, how the patient is sitting, whether they are grinning, sighing when you're asking the question, or if someone is continuously touching a scar on their body, which might indicate trauma, or there is some trauma complex, maybe physical, maybe mental. If suppose there is a nervous trauma, then you might land up into hypericum. So the clinical methods, you should emphasize on both observing the verbal and non-verbal communication, and this model will help you operationalize this principle. So now I'd like to discuss some questioning techniques and what kind of mistakes one should be avoiding in asking those questions. So several pitfalls are there in case taking. The first is closed or leading questions. So if you ask them a yes or no question, that's a big no, big red flag. You should ask like this. Maybe you can ask them that, do you have any other complaints? If you ask them like this, they will either say yes or no. There's this another researcher who warns us, Leishton, who warned us that overuse of closed questions in the interview will discourage the patient in associating and spontaneously reporting their symptoms. So always use open prompt. The next step is anchoring or premature closure. You should not latch onto the first diagnosis or the first symptom that was mentioned. So there's this very special research manual by the name of Merck's manual, which says that making a quick diagnosis and will prevent us from the complete data collection. We'll discuss this in detail just a few slides ahead. Say for example, we'll again come back to that migraine case where one should not assume that it's a migraine case without exploring other possibilities. The last and the most important point is availability bias. So here one should be aware of the bias which comes while we are trying to recognize the pattern. Say, for example, if you just saw a case of a rare remedy very recently, so it might take a larger aspect in your mind, which is also, in other words, known as availability heuristic. So what happens is that it conversely, common diagnosis should not be overlooked like this just because you observe some rare patterns. So one should be open to seeing rare patterns, rare remedies, as well as common patterns and common remedies. Just be open-minded while you are taking the case interview. Whenever you start a case interview, always focus on areas of wider aspects, not narrowing your focus. Say, for example, while you are asking their life space, you can ask them that just tell us about yourself, tell more about your childhood, where are you from? Just keep asking in detail, just give them little cues and they will speak up. So now what we are doing here in this technique is that we are using reflective listening to encourage the patient to expand his symptom and his discussions. Another question you can ask is that you mentioned that you were feeling off maybe from certain years because of a particular aspect in your body. What else has changed since then? This will avoid shutting the case too soon. So what you can do is, for those closed leading questions which can cause recall barriers or embarrassment or judgments, just use neutral phrasing. Just ask them to describe a particular feeling. Don't ask them like this: you are not depressed, are you? This is not the right way to ask the question. You can also achieve a cognitive debias. Say, for example, you can ask them what else, instead of limiting to a particular set of symptoms, and break the mental sets for a particular remedy. You can do that by considering multiple remedies before you close the session. To just don't focus on one particular remedy throughout case taking. Knowingly or unknowingly, you will land on to that particular remedy only if you are not as open in case taking. I call this a gold question bank, which I like to follow. So these are a few important questions, few examples that you can follow while you're taking the case. A few variations also I've suggested. And these questions are open-ended. Say, for example, what has changed over the years? What will this question emphasize? It will force the person to reflect on the long-term changes that they have been facing. Next question says, what bothers you most in daily life? This will highlight the current suffering in the patient's life. Next, you can ask them, what do you tolerate that others wouldn't? So this will surface those unusual tolerances or the indifferences that the patient might have developed towards a particular aspect of their body. Next question, you can ask them, what's the biggest fear about this? They will, make them talk about their hidden feelings, hidden anxieties. Might focus on those aversions also, which he was maybe ignorant of earlier. And when asking, just pause and note their body language. Say, for example, when you're asking a patient about their worries, the patient first might hesitate or might just tear up. So once you notice this, a right probe can land you to a correct space to prescribe. Say, for example, a person might say, I cannot tolerate spicy foods now. So this is a change, right? So you can ask them, when did this change start? So then they will start describing what happened. And is there any memory attached to it? Is there any incidents attached to it? So they will uncover those hidden symptoms behind the scenes. Now, this is a mini recap where you can follow this 4-step framework. First is to listen to the patient, where the patient should speak uninterrupted about their main issue. Observe the cues through their body language, through the tone, facial expressions while they are speaking. Third is you have to probe them with questions. Ask follow-up questions to them also. And target towards things they might have missed. Lastly, you just connect every clue, whether it's spoken, observed, emotional, and then synthesize a totality for your remedy selection. In practice, this is very iterative. Like after connecting an insight, you might want to listen again as the patient reflects on new symptoms. Here, our goal is to conduct an interview that is patient-centric. Another important reference I'll quote here is Engel's writing. You can always go and read that, where it is mentioned that one should systematically cover the content and the process of case taking. Effective use of this model, which you can see on the screen, will ensure that we do not rush in the process and the patient feels heard and observed. One has to emphasize in the patient that the approach is patient-centric. And when you note all this, your outcomes are better, the patient trust is better through this process. I'll share another case with you. Here, you can see the flow along with me. This was a chronic allergy case where the chief complaint was severe hay fever each spring. So if you can see on the slide, I've described the flowchart again so that you can use that hint in this case while I'm discussing this case, and you can see how we approach the case. So the chief complaint was severe allergy every spring. Every spring, the person used to have hay fever. Initially, she just says that she just has mild sniffling, itching as her symptom. When we tried to probe, she mentioned that she had insomnia and heartburn as well, which she thought was unrelated. Who will, relate their allergy to these kind of symptoms? Then we started to probe her on the emotional layer, where the deeper questioning revealed that this all was because of high stress work environment, and she used to suppress her irritability at work. While we were discussing this, she was clenching her fists very tightly when we were discussing her workplace. So this complete clue gave us a totality which was beyond her superficial allergy layer and gave us keynote symptoms, which includes sensation of dust and feathers, dryness of her mucous membrane, irritability, sleeplessness. We repertorized everything and we came to a remedy, Apis mellifica. So the follow-up showed improvement, but she also reported sleeping through the whole night for the first time in so many years. So this case shows that how symptoms can be unveiled through our process significantly and would have altered the remedy choices that we make. So as we are moving linearly, we should remember that this process is cyclical. You have to cover each and every aspect of this cycle to get a complete totality. So we had these 3 remedies in her case, which we were differentiating, and we ultimately gave Apis because of her aggressive irritability and edematous reactions. We cross-referenced everything with her mind and emotional rubrics to finalize this remedy. Now, the common interview mistakes that we make, they become our cognitive pitfalls. The first is rushing, forcing all questions into one visit. Big no. We should not do this. This can lead to missing the nuances of the case. Our literature also warns us against, both the modern literature and the classic literature, they warns us against, completing the whole setup in a single session. You should always often revisit your cases after some time because they might lead into new insights. Because see, the patient is coming to us for the first time. We cannot expect that, just in one sitting, everything will click and the patient will start revealing symptoms. This is all a myth. Just give your patient some time. They will talk to you. Give them some sittings. They will speak to you. Also, while you're interviewing, do not cut off their interview time. Always stay patient-centric. Do not ignore their minor symptoms, especially when they are saying it's nothing. Even Dr. Hahnemann said that homeopath must take notice of all the changes that happen in the mind and the body. Any minor complaint, if neglected, could have been a major decisive keynote in your case. Next important hurdle is premature diagnosis. We have also given it a name, anchoring bias. So you should never jump to conclusion just based on the initial data. The Merck's manual that I'll be discussing further will also lists that it's the topmost error one can commit if you close a case or interview prematurely. Say, for example, one might assume that his anxiety is just that he's on its nerves because they're talking to a new person. If you do not explore such symptoms, you might miss out on something very, very important. Always stay open to the possibility of unexpected root issues which might crop up on the things that you might even not expect. Additionally, you should avoid cognitive biases like availability. Say, for example, you are thinking of recent cases too readily while you are taking the case. Or, these things can derail us. Also, there is another common bias, confirmation bias, wherein you are seeking information to confirm your guess. So, this will derail us. Keep a critical mindset. And if you notice that you're focusing too quickly, just pause and ask yourself, what else could this be? Over time, you will cultivate self-awareness and about these errors, and these errors will reduce during interviewing. Clinically important focus points are that just create a mental checklist and of these categories that you should cover, both physical, behavioral, emotional, all three of them. Do mention those litmus questions we have been discussing, and always focus on the change that might come up on diagnosis. Okay. Now, this term I had used, I'll now explain. So, cognitive errors and heuristics. So, what I mean by saying these terms is that beyond your interviewing technique, one should always focus on their cognitive heuristics. The availability of them can be misleading. For example, if you saw a particular remedy's brilliant results, say for example, you saw Ignatia's result in a particular headache case. So you might, again, if a similar case comes up to you, you might want to prescribe the same remedy. So Merck always points out to this bias where he says that to counter this, always ask yourself, is this case really the same as last one? And the next important thing is confirmation bias. So in confirmation bias, you are not only looking at symptoms from the initial remedy, you are just ignoring the certain aspects of the case. You are not supposed to do that. So you can combat this bias by reviewing the case again before you finalize the remedy. Ask yourself, if I was wrong, what symptom doesn't fit my remedy? Just challenge yourself. What other remedy could it have been? The last heuristic is premature closure, wherein you're deciding on the diagnosis too soon. In homeopathy, where we need a full totality, this is a deadly thing one can commit. So always stay open till your interview ends. So I have been talking about Merck's list of errors. This is a very important thing I want you to focus, because this is a detailed summary in modern terminology where you can understand the biases you might commit while taking a case, and it will answer most uncomfortable questions that you might have had during prescriptions. So why are prescriptions fails? Because we assume that we are doing everything right. So focus on this visually. First, you focus on the center where you see case taking. This is the battlefield. This is where everything is decided. Not in materia medica, not in repertorization, not in any other step. If your case is wrong, the prescription will be completely wrong. Now, come on the blue aspects where I have discussed the errors a doctor might commit. So, we might assume that the errors are happening in prescribing, but there are so many errors that we might commit even before the prescription happens. Even before you even have the thought that you have to prescribe to a case. You can take an incomplete history. You can ask closed or superficial questions. You can miss the verbal cues. You can misinterpret the symptoms and fall into the most dangerous zones, cognitive bias. Now, the cognitive bias layer, which is the most important part of the whole presentation today. Also being the most advanced part. This kind of error is committed by even the experienced of homeopaths. Now I will come to anchoring bias, where we just stick to the first symptom. We just anchor to the first symptom that we hear. Another bias is confirmation bias, where you will only see what supports your remedy. Premature closure, we have been discussing. Do not stop thinking too early. Stay stuck on to the case to the very last second of your case taking. Our issue is not lack of knowledge. It is the distortion of perception which you have to correct. Now, let's shift to the right side of the table, where I have tried to list and Merck has tried to list the errors committed by the patient. Patient will not give you a pure data. They might normalize their symptoms. They might ignore or forget their details. They might suppress their emotions, suppress their experiences, or just simply they might say that it's not important. So what we are receiving in case taking is not reality. It is filtered. So now just follow this flow in your mind and understand how the error can enter. Okay, so the patient might experience something, they will filter it, they will provide you incomplete data, and then you misinterpret it, and then we prescribe confidently, and the case fails. Through this, I want to give you a key insight that most failures are not remedy failures. They are the perception failures that a physician might commit. A successful homeopath is not just someone who knows remedies. It is someone who can detect those missing aspects, who can hear those unspoken things, who can correct the bias in their own perception. Only then you will understand this line that a remedy is rarely wrong. Your totality can be wrong. Also, more researches you can go and read to clarify your concept on these biases. You can go and read Mandel, that was published in 2024, or you can read Engel's papers, which will help you understand thorough interviewing techniques. I have again tried to provide some phrasing variants that you can use. For advanced practice, just vary the way you ask your questions. Instead of asking, "What are your symptoms?" just ask them, "Can you describe what happens, when you first notice this kind of a discomfort?" Or, "Walk me through your typical day, when you're having this particular problem." Or challenge your, worded biases. Don't say evening or night sweats. Just use descriptive words. Say, for example, you can say, "Tell me about the headache, that happened that night or that particular time." Or you can ask the questions which are a bit process oriented, where you can ask the process that when did your particular complaint start? What do you think might have triggered your complaint? For emotional questions, you can ask them, what does this situation, worry you most? Why this particular situation is worrying you the most? You can ask them a norm breaking question. Say, for example, you can ask them, "Imagine I am the patient. What would you want to ask me?" All these kind of variants, you can, encourage the patient to respond and bring out those hidden details. Pair each question with your empathetic listening power. Keep your voice gentle. This will increase the patient trust and increase the disclosure that they provide you. This, I am picking up the sentence from JAMA Notes, where patients with less trust on the physician are more likely to withhold the information. And you can also practice silent probing. By this, I mean that you can ask them a question and then just sit quietly. Some patient will, volunteer to answer more once you don't jump in, or once you stop jumping in. So this is a full flow diagram wherein you can understand how you should ask a case. This illustrates all elements in one frame, where you have to ask the chief complaints, hidden physical complaints, emotional layer, behavioral cues, merge everything into remedial totality. Also, if you can see here, the flow is bidirectional, right? The arrows are bidirectional. Why? Because a new emotional insight may prompt you for searching another domain of the person. Say, for example, a physical might prompt to emotional, and emotional might prompt to physical, like this. So think of this like a real-time, map, wherein if we go back to the same hay fever case where the chief complaint was sneezing, expanded by those hidden GI issues, anger issues, we combined everything and got the full totality. So these arrows here will emphasize on the non-linear nature of our case taking. I was saying earlier that this was cyclical, remember? So just imagine everything linked to one another and emphasize on the feedback loops. Re-evaluate, keep asking yourself questions till a new clue emerges. Now I will share a chronic case with you, finally, where this case had a chronic skin issue for several months. There was this unrelenting eczema. Initially, he volunteered that any cream was just, temporarily helping. When we asked further on probing, we got to know that the patient has intense cold feet, hidden clue, and heavy itching when the person was in bed. Emotional probing really revealed that he was having a lingering shame from his childhood bullying, which he never thought of something as serious when he grew up. Behaviorically, we could see that he was, brushing off the advices that were given to him, and he had a different kind of pride. And he used to endure those harsh treatments that were happening with him. So, first, sulfur was given to this case because of the burning heat, eczema, cold feet, etc. After 2 months, when the lesions improved by 60%, but the emotional block persisted, then Natramur came up, which targeted the suppressed grief of the patient, where he was he had aversion to consolation, remembering his childhood hurt. By the end of 3 months, the eczema almost cleared up. He reported feeling more emotionally expressive, and this shows the need of follow-up remedies as well. It does not mean that once you land on a particular remedy, then you're just done with. You might need a series of remedies. This will also highlight the potency strategies that you can use in your practice. So, for tangible things, there is a different potency. Then, for deeper work, there is a different potency. This is the comparison chart that were most important aspects for us in distinguishing this case. In advanced practice, you can, vary everything and come to such kind of conclusions. Now, how do we integrate everything that we discussed? Usually, the interview, you can just imagine it lasting it for 2 hours, where the time management is your key. Early in the initial 10-15 minutes, let the patient speak spontaneously about the chief complaint that you observe. Then, for the next half an hour, just systematically cover those bodily symptoms and ask the gold questions we just discussed to draw out those physical clues. Watch how their body, mind, face, everything is reacting. When you land into mid-interview, that is somewhere around, maybe you've crossed that 45-minute mark, just encourage those deep emotional questions. Encourage the discussion of personal history. Then, in the last 15 to 30 minutes, go through your notes, connect everything that you have been asking or talking about, and wrap up with the differential questions. Confirm your remedy choice. And also, this is just a tentative chart. You can always be flexible depending upon your, experience, but try to be as elaborative, as open-minded as you can be in your case taking, and just use these checkpoints in your case taking. Maybe initial days you might require more time. Maybe with experience, you land up to remedies fast, but just keep following the structure so that you do not miss any important aspect of your case taking. Also, keep reviewing in between your sessions, your cases. Okay. Now, when you're finalizing your case interview, I am explicitly naming most common pitfalls again so that you are not avoiding. First, we discussed anchoring. Do not latch on to your initial sentences. Keep a differential list. Say, for example, if a patient says, I have a prickling rash, just don't land up to a first diagnosis. Keep a list of differentials with you. The way we study in practice of medicine. Now, for premature closure, do not leave until, multiple possibilities are vetted. For example, a patient might say that, it's just allergies, but check for underlying symptoms, underlying sensitivities instead of just closing on that allergy. Availability heuristic, you can say, for example, you saw a great case of arnica, lycopodium, sulfur last week. Now, do not imagine the same remedy acting on the case unless you have taken the proper case. Just take the proper case with the fresh mind. Confirmation bias will be choosing a remedy idea and trying to fit your case around it. Okay, so be mindful of these errors. Turn your awareness into the superpower of interviewing as a practitioner, and you can, keep these errors somewhere in front of you in a chart or somewhere visible to you, so that you are probed again and again in your mind to avoid those errors. Encourage a practice of taking a pause during diagnosis. Keep asking yourself, what else? What else? Keep asking the patient also the same question. What else you want to share? What else you are facing? In conclusion, I'd like to say that the listening is your superpower to drastically improve your outcomes by giving you those hidden clues. When you incorporate the full authentic totality, the remedy will fit more precisely. This will typically lead to faster and more lasting relief to the patient, because you have just hit the root of that case rather than suppressing their superficial layer, secondary complaints, etc. Patient will, notice this, that they will feel genuinely understood, more committed to treatment, they will adhere to the treatment plan, they will come to you again and again. Again, I'm quoting a researcher where he says that patient-centric interview, that is active listening and observation skills, will unravel the toughest cases for you. Integrate all these techniques, target all these questions, and along with the keen observation, awareness about biases, you will place yourself at the pinnacle of homeopathic art and science. Reinforceable value here is that these skills will distinguish a senior homeopath through case from an average one. You can always go through more references, more reading materials. And one message I would like to conclude with, and this is that the most important symptoms are often unspoken words. Change one thing about your practice. Start paying attention on what patient doesn't say. Those hidden clues, once uncovered, will lead you to true simillimum. I am really thankful, deeply in gratitude for being a patient audience. Please feel free to ask questions. You can take this number and ask, and we can always start a discussion on something new and maybe clarify the techniques that we discussed today. Over to you, Niharika.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful session, for sharing such great learning experiences. We would like to take the privilege to honor you with our CAR Appreciation Certificate. Please accept it from us. Thank you for your gracious presence and for your precious time in sharing your knowledge and your wisdom.
Thank you for the feedback. It is so motivating, and I'm really, really appreciative of this opportunity by Kavita ma'am and CAR study group. Just thank you.
It is always lovely listening to you, ma'am. Let me now announce our upcoming May webinar. We have our CAR 6th Annual Celebration and Award Ceremony 2026 on 9th May 2026, 8 p.m. IST, 10:30 a.m. EST. The occasion will be graced by the presence of founder and CEO Dr. Kavita Kokonu, honorable guest Dr. Vatsala Sperling, And the webinar for the day will be on the topic, the Just Right Child-Centric Module in Uniquely Special Child Verbal and Non-Verbal. The speaker for the day is Dr. Dinesh Chauhan, MD Homeo. The link for the same for registering for this webinar is available at our website. You may register and mark your presence at the event. The website for the same is kavitakehomeo.com. Don't miss the webinar. Heartfelt thanks to our viewers and followers who have joined us today. We have many such informative webinars lined up in the upcoming sessions with more renowned homeopaths. For the upcoming webinar info and other updates, you can follow our social media handles. You may watch the recording of this webinar and others at our YouTube channel, Kavita Kukunur. Thank you to all the CA volunteers for their continuous support and selfless services with which we are able to organize such webinars. For any information, reach out at caststudygroup@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone.